Okay, let's take another look um, after shaking out a little bit of the detritus on the wealth tax issue. Um, uh, um, in particular, the Gary Stevenson version. So this is just just tried to clarify why I think it's false, because um, identifying a mechanism which shows how something's happening doesn't tell you how to fix it. So you could see what's happening, but still be unable to do anything. Like right now, I could see the sun shining. There's radiation pouring down, et cetera, et cetera. But there's nothing I can do about it. I can't like put out the sun or something. I could identify properly a process as it's happening, but then when I say here's the way to stop it, I just talk nonsense. Like I said, let's get a bucket of water and pour it on the sun. Um, so I think it's right. So I think what I find very especially interesting about this case is like one, um, it's an example of how ideas enter into the logical space of public discussion. Like Aristotle says originally the word logos means just speech, and then the notion of logic develops out of that through conscious prescriptions of thinkers. They start to say this is the type of way we ought to be, so-called reasoning, and so on. But originally, logic meant the public discussion at large. Somebody says, "What's all the talk about wealth tax?" And then there's a storm around it, and then there's bad feelings, and then there's sort of actually, I would say there actually is, like, it's weird because it's a Spaltung because it's like two things are true at once. I think it's totally. I see the Piers Morgan, um, Rupert Murdoch, Donald Trump, whoever it is, sort of in the light of here's this golem with its ring, my precious, and it's like you can't take even $1 from me, and just total assholes. I can totally see that, but at the same time, they're actually making. They're also actually saying some things where they're trying to clarify what's happening in the economy, and they don't know, and nobody knows in a certain way. It's true we can see sort of it's we can see, as it were, forensically the thing after it happens, and then sort of basically see this is how it happens. That's true, but in order to fix it is something different. So now I try to say, and then this is somewhere where somebody could correct me if I'm just misunderstanding. The way it seems like to me is what his whole case is that salaries are going up for the wealthy, and then therefore they have more cash, and then therefore they get a greater proportion of all things that exist, all things that could be bought and sold. And then you could ask, like, why are salaries going up? So I don't know if he actually says, like, to me it seems like the reason is because the wealthy got better at harvesting money from the whole country, and the process begins basically with the quant revolution, and actually with people like I mean, I know Stevenson is not acting based on like long-term rebalancing schemes and that type of stuff. He was doing sort of uh, kind of like Top Gun, like, oh, we're the best at doing this. We're better than you, and we're going to take your money off you. And we have a big bank behind us, and we have. I mean, interestingly, he mentioned one case where he would have made money if he was allowed to keep a trade going, but they stopped it. But the point of having a big bank is like everybody else, they get a margin call, they get harvested. There's friction, there's fluctuation in the market. There's so-called volatility, everybody else gets harvested, but the big banks have unlimited margin, virtually unlimited margin. They could stay in, and they always make money. So the banks have gotten, so even though he's not directly doing quant stuff, like totally, I don't, they have all this kind of Fibonacci number stuff and all this bullshit, rebalancing schemes and shit. But actually, yeah, they're better at it now. But part of the reason they're better is just because they have more money and they have more margin, and they could do more. They could do things that the small investors don't do, and then the small investors are induced to get their money taken off them. That's the way I see it. But okay, there's even if that's true, and then it's just a simple process by which they keep taking more and more money off the world as a whole. They understand better the flows of money. They understand better the chances to be the man who broke the Bank of England. Back in the day, it was Soros. Or, I mean, that's the example Jeffrey Epstein gives of taking his shots. He says he doesn't have anything like, I don't know, Warren Buffett has long-term notions, but he said the way he operates is he just, when he has, he didn't say when he has insider trading information, but it's sort of like that. When he has a chance to do something, manipulate the markets, make a big chunk of money, that's when he acts. In a way that doesn't matter that much. What really matters is that what we're seeing is the wealth transfer. That's the main thing that this Stevenson argument seems to be based on, and it seems like we could observe it and it's true. But does that mean that any specific anecdote is the truth? One thing I find interesting is the focus, which is full spectrum of people of all kinds of political inclinations, talk about the NIMBY problem as terms of housing. It's clear, though, also one could say if the ordinary people had greater purchasing power or greater quote-unquote demand, it's called demand, the will to buy plus also having the money. If there's more demand for housing, which is basically like the will and more money, then the NIMBY problem would probably be like more natural. It would be overcome without regulation. But there isn't that money. But then the other way to solve it, which is like the more popular and more mainstream, it seems like everybody is saying, oh, just unclog this vetocracy, which causes housing not to be built because people don't want housing developments in their neighborhood or whatever, and then they go to the city council, and then this slows everything down, and people bring lawsuits, and it's endless, and then Fukuyama calls this the vetocracy, and the lack of state capacity, because the state can't do anything about it because it involves basic rights, substantive rights. Because people have the right to complain about this stuff and go to the city council and do all that stuff, and it can't. And it would be unconstitutional to put a stop to this. So the state has no recourse. But you could see that if maybe the situation is different a little bit in Great Britain, but you could see. I mean, that's the American situation. But you could see how that would be. It's so that you could see how, depending on what your attitude is, that could seem like just a distraction from the real problem, because the real problem is, looked at it in a market way, the real problem is there's not enough there's not enough demand power, there's not enough money to break through that bottleneck. And then because then the companies that wanted to build things would have more money, and then they would find some way around those regulations, and they'd get things built anyway. Because they would have more, because the people that would be their customers would have more money. They'd know that they'd have more money coming in, and so on. So all this, I mean, that I mentioned partially because Gary Stevenson putting forward this acts as though everyone who didn't immediately get on board with his mission were just paid to tire him out, paid to tire him out with irrelevancies and to be pests, because they were paid by Rupert Murdoch and Piers Morgan and all these people. But on the other hand, I guess what I wanted to say is I just don't see that. It's like the wealth tax is just something said at random almost. So it seems like it makes sense because you're not reversing the process. Like if the money if they got better at harvesting money, it doesn't reverse the process to put in a wealth tax. It just sort of like, it's like they're still better at it, but you're sort of like, I don't know, you're just doing something else, which is supposed to, in an extraneous way, solve the problem. You're not actually reversing the process that they're better at taking money out of the common stock of money. It's not clear how this sort of retroactive redistribution scheme, which has been considered for a long time, it don't seem actually the right scheme. And so they could give just a reference of somebody who has cred on as being a progressive, as being totally in favor of wealth tax if they would work, is Roberto Unger at Harvard Law School, Brazilian guy, deep sort of leftist. He calls it a progressive formation, and he doesn't believe in it. So why doesn't it seem to work? It seems like in Luxembourg and other places where recent experiments have been made. So that's the other thing. People say, oh, but there were high wealth taxes back in World War II times or something, or before that. But the economy wasn't a quant economy. It was a totally different economy. There weren't the problems of this massive intensification of the sort of ability to harvest money from the whole pool of money. Because, I mean, you could think of n number of factors, and I don't even know what they all are, but I mean, obviously, more people are participating in the markets since the internet, right? Like it used to be, you had to have a stockbroker, you had to be part of some kind of fund or something, it was harder to gain entry into the foreign exchange world where trillions of dollars change hands every day but today anybody with a computer can participate, can lose a little bit of money on this, like the casinos. Just as it's like almost irrelevant aside, but it seems kind of relevant. I heard a statistic that there's more people spend more time on gambling online than they do reading in the last number of years. So it's like we're not in the same condition. I mean, that's just one example. How essential it is to the situation, I don't know, but I think we're just not in the same situation in any serious sense as during the period when there were high wealth taxes, which are pointed to as some kind of golden age. I don't think they were a golden age. I think, like, one thing, like, a lot of people died in World War II, so the economy was different for that reason also. But all the attempts to do wealth taxes in the digital economy, in the period when we have the so-called Jeffries taxes, changed the term of Eisenhower from the industrial military complex to industrial digital military complex. When we have this industrial digital military complex, And it is that because the NATO bloc comprises 70% of world GDP, and there's um, been understood a link between the so-called unity of defense, or that's the wrong term, but it's something a lot. Ursula von der Leyen used the term um, directly in connection to the global supply chain. The what does they call it? The uniformity of defense. I forget the term, but in any case, that the Strait of Hormuz, for instance, when a ship is raided there, that means that something will come late to a factory outside Belgium, etc., etc. That's understood that the economy is totally linked to the defense of all the NATO countries. So that this is also an issue where even if, I mean, supposing it were true that the wealth tax worked in modern examples, but the Luxembourg example and other examples show that it doesn't, as modern examples. Indivisibility of defense is the term I was looking for. Even if it were true, supposing it came at the expense of those factories having less output of artillery shells or whatever it is they need, of drone parts, etc. Somebody who wasn't single-mindedly only concerned with the concerns that Gary Stevenson is concerned with, that there be that the transfer of wealth be sort of halted and reversed or something, and that the question of whether ordinary people can have more purchase power, can afford houses and so on, be the only issue. Like anyone who has a different, as it were, a scale of values, like what they're trying to do is in a way they might agree with a lot of things Stevenson is promoting, but then there's higher values because we have to consider whether we want to live under Sharia law or something, like the Wellenbeck vision of things. But if it's not that, whether we want to allow Russia to expand more freely, and it's not, the problem is, like, people put it in terms of, oh, the Russia wants a sphere of influence, and then you get these people that say, oh, the notion of a sphere of influence is illicit, it's from the NATO side or something. But the problem is that there's a constant attempt by every country that's able to put leaders that are in favor of its projects in power in every country on earth. But say, like, only America really has the power to do that in a very large way to hundreds of countries. But the other countries also try to do it to the extent they can. There's I think there's 700,000 Hezbollah troops, and they're not simply in Persia or Iran, but they're also in Lebanon and other places, right? Every country tries to get people that like it to be in power. And it's happening constantly, so that the economics, so that if you would say, oh yeah, it would be better for the greater proportion of people in terms of having more purchase power to buy houses, to buy cars, to afford their bills, if we would do this, but it would come at the expense of allowing somebody who wants to impose a different form of life on us. Sharia law is the example I like, kind of, because it's so it's extreme, but it makes clear we wouldn't really want to replace the Constitution with Sharia. I think most people, some people do because they're Muslim, I guess, but most people don't. But it's the same in sort of varying degrees with the sort of Chinese system or Russian system or some other system. It's like most people don't. Most people are like, it's fine as long as there's different communities and they're all under the same government. But what is not considered is, what if that group wanted to actually change the mode of governance of the whole country, and then then you can see the existential problem a little bit more. We also have all this happening within the light of the development of AI, robotics, and many things. So that it could be that the, as it were, narrow and intense vision that Stevenson brings among people who are well-meaning but see the horizon of the question of what is the good solution in a lit differently under different concerns, are not merely trying to be pests or merely trying to irritate. And that then we see, in a way, yeah, Piers Morgan is correct. You are being defensive. Stevenson was being defensive. And partially, and I say this again because in the light of the basic human discussion, what is the wealth tax? What's the talk about it all about? Can we have a discussion about that? Will it be a logical discussion? What actually is a logical discussion? It's an example of how it might be helpful if we would get a better education on what any discussion at all in this sort of sense is, and what the factors are, and how some of it has to do with different horizons of you could, I mean, suppose you had the notion of a Shuna Sila, of a person who's basically generous, basically sound normal intelligence, not some moronic loudmouth like Trump, but sound normal intelligence, basically generous, basically have other good traits, but their horizon in which they make the decision could be different. So they might think it's more important to be concerned with this indivisibility of defense, as Ursula von der Leyen does, than simply with all things should be set aside in order to redistribute wealth in favor of ordinary people. That might not be the only possible concern, and it might be that somebody who is basically a sound human being would think differently than this plan, and not only be doing it because they're hired by the wealthy to do it. And then that all becomes, and clearly that's all thrown into a chaos, because we don't know who's motivated by what and by what degree they're motivated by, and whether people are actually motivated by numerous things at once, and whether we have to go into the questions of the unconscious and have a theory of the drives to tell us about what's happening, and et cetera, et cetera. But okay, that by means of sort of a provocation, and also just as a simple statement of why I think I'm not. That's why I'm not persuaded, I guess I'll say. It doesn't seem to me, and just to state it again as a bookend, it doesn't seem to me that pointing out how something is happening, like saying forensically, this is how, making a really strong case about this is how it happened, this is how the transfer of wealth happened, is necessarily a credential that would tell you this man is an authority on how to fix the problem. We can see the problem without knowing, in a certain way, without knowing very much about how to fix it, or without being especially having credentials worthy of emulating, so far as we present ourselves as a physician who's going to cure the disease. We could know a lot about the disease without even having any insight into how to cure the disease, is my claim.